my name is Peter Raymer. In this video series, we've been looking at chain of command and how to write chain of command classes on various types of objects. We've looked at how to write chain of command on classes, on tables, on form methods. In this video, we're looking at how to write chain of command on form DataSource methods. Now, one example is, let's pretend we're looking at the sales order form, and the sales order form has multiple data sources on it. It's got the sales table data source for the header and sales line data source for the lines. Let's pretend that maybe you have a button or a field that you need to hide or show or enable or disable based on which record you're selecting in the grid. And you could do this on other forms. This is just one example. The best place for that code would be the active method of the data source. The active method gets called every time you change which record you're selecting in a grid. Well, in this case, this is base Microsoft code. We are not allowed to touch this code directly, even though sales line does have an active method on this data source. We are not actually allowed to touch this method or the code inside of it, but we can add our code to a chain of command class and method and do that kind of functionality. So let's take a look what that would look like. I can right click and say add new item in my project. I can select class, and then it's a best practice for me to name my chain of command class after the name of my base object. And then I recommend that you do an underscore and give the type of object you're going to extend. It could be data source here or sales line, just to differentiate it from any chain of command classes that you have that are already on, say, the table. And then we have to end the name of our chain of command method or class with the suffix underscore extension. That's a requirement. So now that we've got our class, we need to add a method inside of it that follows the exact same syntax as the method would be on the form. It actually is just public int active, but you can always look at the code inside the sales table form to take a look and kind of verify that for yourself. So that's our first step. The next thing we need is we need to let the compiler know that this is a chain of command method. So we're going to add an attribute at the top. We use these square brackets to add an attribute. Then we're going to use the global function extension of. Extension of takes a string, but rather than just type in a hard-coded string that would not be detected by the compiler if that changed, we're going to use another global function to help us out. In this case, instead of using form string or a form str, we can use form DataSource str, and this is a global function that we can then put in. In this case, it takes two parameters. Our first parameter is the name of our form, so our form is sales table, and then comma, we need to give it the name of our data source. So I'm going to type in sales line, and until I do, the compiler is going to be a little upset with me. So there we go. Be really careful with, kind of what parameters and that you've typed this in correctly. Now that I've done that, I should be able to save and verify that our syntax so far is correct. I still am missing a few things. I need to make this class final. All chain of command classes must be final. And then it looks like I have one too many parentheses there. Okay. And then the next thing is I need to call the base method inside of our method. So in this case, I'm going to say next active. And sometimes the IntelliSense is a little too aggressive for us, so we can put in the word active. I also need to return this integer. So I'm going to create an int variable and then hit enter and say this is our return variable and set it equal to whatever our active method is calling. And I'm going to go ahead and return this here. Now we're in a position where we've created our main chain of command stub, and we could actually add our functionality at the end of this. Of course, helps if I type this correctly. So here I'm going to add a comment where we could say, based on the record selected, enable, disable, or hide show a value on or a control on the form. Okay. Well, now that we're on this data source, one thing that's a little different about this example compared to previous examples is we need to actually get the active record. Maybe we need to only hide or show this value based on, some specific value on that record. And so the way we can do that is we can use this function where we type this, which refers to this data source, and then we can say this dot cursor. And this is going to get us the active table buffer or active record that's selected on the grid. And we can actually then store that value in a table buffer variable. So I'm going to go ahead and declare a variable called sales line and set it equal to this dot cursor. Now I can do whatever I need to with that sales line and evaluate. Maybe I'm going to say if sales line dot item ID equals some specific value, then I'm going to hide or show my button, hide or show my control on that grid. I'll just comment that out right now since we won't finish that, but this would be the best place for you to add your code. Okay, this has been an example of using chain of command on a form data source method. There's many other methods that you might use. Active, create, init, execute query are really common methods that you might change on a data source. Thanks so much for watching.